just finished listening to Backup for the second time, and this novelette has a lot of endgame stuff going on. Obligatory spoiler warning for everything through Battleground, and if you haven't caught up with the series, what are you doing? Go read it. It's going to be awesome, I promise. There's a reason why I do all these videos on Dresden Files. It's because I literally cannot stop myself. And before we start, this is not sponsored, but I wanted to share that Jim Butcher and a bunch of other big urban fantasy authors are coming out with an anthology that comes out on March 7th, 2023. It's called Instinct, an Animal Rescuers anthology. And that's where you will find a story called Fugitive, where Mouse and Cerberus team up to go after something that tries to escape from Hades. The profits are being donated to the Lifeline Puppy Rescue, and as someone who volunteers with rescues, including adopting 2 out of the 3 dogs I've fostered, I've already pre-ordered my ebook copy, and I'm basically in love with anything that helps animals. Now let's get back to Thomas, because from reading the comments, I know he's one of your favorites. The first thing I noticed when reading this story is that Thomas has a lot of complicated relationships with his family. On the Wraith's side, Thomas doesn't seem to like his sister very much, even though she was like a second mom to him after Margaret left. Laura tries to pull his strings like a puppet, and when it comes to the Venatori things, he seems okay with it, but otherwise he's afraid of her beginning to control him. If she can control her father, then she can definitely control him if she really wants to. And understandably, I think Thomas is worried about giving her too much to work with in that department. I think he might be worrying about something he can't control, because with Justine working for her, he's really stuck in her orbit of control anyways and can't really do anything about it without jeopardizing Justine. Thomas is also constantly worried that Laura is going to introduce him to his fate. He does things like check under his car for things that could hurt him and carefully enters his apartment in case there's someone who wishes him ill in there instead of a normal courier. And speaking of the courier, it's likely that Justine, at the time that she takes the message from Laura to Thomas about the Venatori stuff, is already infected. She got infected around the same time she started working for Laura, which would also be soon after Thomas almost drained her life force and her hair went white. This is really sneaky because Thomas was so worried about Laura lying to pull a dangerous fast one on him, and the one time that he rushes into something without thinking about it is when he smells Justine's shampoo and goes rushing into the room to see her. Ironically, Thomas is so obsessed with Laura hurting him, controlling him, or dragging Justine into the Oblivion War stuff that he didn't even notice that Justine was already playing for Team Outsider. When I read the end of Battleground, where Justine revealed herself to be infected, I thought it was silly to infect such an insignificant ally of Harry's. But now I think that was a brilliant decision. The people with the biggest potential to change something aren't always the ones who are appointed to powerful positions, or the people with the most raw power. It's the people in the background that they listen to that are the ones you have to worry about. Because the smaller characters have access to all the information and stuff that the more powerful characters do, but they don't have as many eyes watching their every move. Justine was also the person who was feeding information from the White Court to Thomas, who then fed it to Harry, who then passed it on to the White Council. So the White Council acted in ways that were very predictable to the outsiders based on that information, and Harry looked really suspicious because he was the one relaying that bad information to them in the first place. This story happens before Turncoat, so I doubt anyone on Team Harry would have known to check for people who didn't even know they were being controlled by outsiders, so reading the story hits a lot differently on a reread than it would on my first read-through of the series. Thomas's relationship with Harry is very different in that it is the complete opposite of his relationship with the Wraiths, minus getting dragged into all these sort of supernatural shenanigans. Thomas basically is the opposite of his brother. Thomas has a large family that he wants little to do with, while Harry clings to the only family he has and then builds additional family out of his friends and colleagues. Harry is also a hero who will do anything, damn the consequences, to do the right thing and save the day. Thomas is a self-professed monster who puts on a mask for the world and plays into his disguise as a French hairstylist to make people believe it and do what he wants, which is mainly leave him alone. His home is very expensive and impractical, while Harry lives in a cheap basement apartment that feels cozy and inviting in comparison. And the home is kind of a reflection of how you feel as a person. So Thomas is all pretty on the outside. Excuse you. Tate says hi. Look at this cute boy in his cute hoodie. Look at this cute boy who's laying down for us. And they say that your home is a reflection of who you are as a person and sort of how you feel. Harry might have like a shitty basement apartment, but at least it's like homey and comfortable. Whereas Thomas has this beautiful fancy apartment with a bunch of furniture that's uncomfortable and that he doesn't like. This is one of those moments where I realize that Jim is a much better writer than a lot of people give him credit for, and I really appreciate little details like this. And getting back to the point, unlike the Wraiths, Thomas loves Harry and will do anything to help him and keep him safe. One interesting thing that Thomas says is that his mother gave him his pentacle amulet when he was 5 years old on his birthday. We all know that Thomas has a pentacle amulet, and it's the twin to Harry's. Their mother gave them these amulets, and they are part of the story of how Harry was able to confirm that Thomas was his brother in blood rights. But we don't know until Thomas tells us in backup that his amulet was given to him on his birthday. So why is this significant? I couldn't find a definitive timeline, but I think Thomas is about 5 years older than Harry, so Margaret would have had to have been about to make a run from Papa Wraith when she gave him the amulet, and this might have been one of the last times that Thomas ever saw her. I doubt she would have gotten pregnant and then come back to see Thomas, but there's about 8.5 months between Valentine's Day and Halloween, so it's possible. Harry could have also been a little bit premature just because they needed to get the whole Starborn timing right. There's only a window of a couple hours from what I've read, so they didn't really have much choice in this matter. I find in a lot of these short stories that most of the interesting information to me is the little tidbits of information that drop and not necessarily the main plot of the story. Because it's like an Easter egg hunt, except eggs are expensive now and this is free because I got the book from my library. And one of these conversations is when Thomas is explaining the Venatori stuff to Bob in order to convince him to help him. Thomas explains the Oblivion War to Bob, and because Bob is a spirit of intellect and not a mortal, him knowing doesn't mess anything up. Feels hand-wavy, but I'll take it. Basically, there's old gods and older forces that are really, really powerful and scary, and they need human belief in order to keep them connected to our world. If people forget about them, then they get banished outside of the mortal world where they can't do us harm. And to me, this sounds just like they get banished to the outside. I think there's a Word of Jim where he explains that the outsiders are the underlings for the old gods who are basically Lovecraftian nightmare inspo. And if I'm wrong, tell me in the comments down below, and we always have a great discussion about this stuff. Now, what do you do with one of these baddies that's active in the world and messing stuff up? You could stick them in Demon Reach and wait things out. It's perfect. You could just take the worst of the worst out of the picture until everybody gets distracted by stupid mundane stuff like the Kardashians. Or the subtle differences in flight velocities between African and European unlated swallows. Everybody forgets about the real adversaries and then they can't hurt us anymore. But now we have things like widespread literacy and the internet. And when this plan was hatched, everyone expected those two things even less than they expected the Spanish Inquisition. It makes sense that it's getting harder and harder to make the whole fade into the abyss of obscurity thing what saves humanity. And finally, getting back to the plot, Thomas is a pretty funny villain. Thomas decides to run into danger even though he's still unwillingly disguised by that illusion that was placed upon him to make him look like some sort of villain. The Stegan took what I expect as a page out of the adversary's book. If you can't take somebody down, trick somebody else into doing your dirty work for you. I have a theory that I've probably mentioned before that Harry winning the duel against Justin happened on purpose. Because they knew that if Harry broke the first law of magic, then the White Council would dispense justice and make him not be their problem anymore. And it makes sense to use the same strategy if they're playing for the same team. Thomas doesn't care about winning or doing anything in style. He just wants to make sure that Harry gets the kid to safety and doesn't get the Book of Rituals, because if he does and hands it over to the White Council like he's supposed to, then they'll publish it, and the critters in the book will never be forgotten. And if they're never forgotten, that means that there's the belief to keep them connected to the real world and everyone is screwed. This is basically what happened when the Brothers Grimm published their Book of Fairy Tales and why we will never be without the fake courts or the queens. To accomplish this goal, Thomas doesn't have to be a competent villain, and he knows it. He takes the opportunity to be as cheesy and cliche as possible, annoying even Harry enough to say screw it and just blast him out of the way to get to the kid. But Thomas is smart enough to set himself up in a way that when Harry blasts him, he gets pushed towards his enemy, and he's able to take the book and take out his enemy, and everything is okay. The villain of the story, he's really good at showing up for Harry and trying to save his brother and make sure that his brother's okay. Even though he's definitely a predator with a lot of temptation, I don't think that Thomas is the monster that he thinks he is. If you like what I do, please hit the subscribe button and join the Caffeination. I post a lot of Dresden Files content, and I also do a thing called the Saturday Show where I talk about the books that I'm reading and other sort of booktubey things. So if you're interested in book recommendations or what I feel about what I'm reading at the moment, definitely check that out. Like, share, subscribe on all your social media, and if you think that I suck at this, leave me a comment down below and I'll try to suck better next time. Spay and neuter your pets. Bye!